that this was recorded back in April. So while the information is still accurate, there might be some updates to sites and that sort of thing, and some program updates as well since the episode was recorded. So if you're interested in anything that we discussed today, definitely do check out those websites that we'll list at the end of the episode for some more up-to-date information. Thanks for listening and enjoy the episode.
Coffee, Cows and Crops is produced by the Peace Country Beef and Forage Association and hosted by Extension Coordinator Johanna Murray. On this podcast, we discuss management practices and research results with scientists, ranchers, researchers, and farmers. We strive to share innovative information and farming practices supported by sound science and practical wisdom. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get learning. Hi everybody, thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Coffee, Cows and Crops. On today's episode, I'm chatting with Assar Grinde from the Ag Plastics Recycling Group. And we're going to be talking about recycling agricultural plastics and how that program works. But before we get into all the fun stuff, Assar, would you like to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about how you got involved in plastic recycling?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. My name's Assar Grinde. I'm a cow-calf producer in Ponoka County in central Alberta. And I was pretty involved with the Alberta Beef Producers, about 7 years ago. I was a delegate and then I got on the board of directors. And I think in 2016, I had been stockpiling a lot of my silage pit plastic on farm. And I'd brought a resolution to one of our fall producer meetings to ask ABP to lobby the government to look at finding a solution for ag plastics, because a lot of the municipalities at the time didn't even want it being brought to their pits. And so the only option was really burning it. So I think the following year in 2017, there was two more resolutions that were brought to the Alberta Beef Producer AGM, one from Zone 6 and one from Zone 5. And the delegate body passed them there. And at the same time, a bunch of the other commodity groups in Alberta, as well as like the rural municipalities of Alberta and the Association of Agricultural Fieldmen, they had the same sort of motions, like we need to figure out what to do with all of this ag plastic. And so a bunch of the different stakeholders decided to get together and form the Agricultural Plastics Recycling Group. That included manufacturers and recyclers and like the Recycling Council of Alberta, and then all the different agricultural groups. And because I was one of the ones that brought the original motion forward and I was on the board, I got voluntold that I was going to be the representative. And even though I'm not with ABP anymore, I'm still sitting there as the beef producers representative. And I know way more about ag plastics now than I thought I ever would, and about the recycling industry. So that's kind of a quick background.
Cool. So I think one of the most interesting things about this whole program is that it really has been industry and producer driven. Like it didn't come from a top-down government mandate.
Yeah, like there was, like when the Ag Plastics Recycling Group formed, like we spent the first year probably just doing a lot of information gathering from all around the world, looking at other countries and provinces, what they were doing with ag plastics. And then there was a bit of lobbying, and that we eventually got a $1 million grant from the Alberta government to start a 3-year pilot project to look at collecting ag plastics and kind of look at the any costs or challenges specific to Alberta with collecting. And the two plastics that we ended up bringing into the pilot program were twine and grain bags, because at the time when it started in 2019, 2018, those were really the two products that had already developed recycling markets. You don't want to be collecting plastic in a pilot program and then realize there's nowhere to send it. So those were the two that we focused on, and we hired through a open competition. Clean Farms was the organization. It's a stewardship organization funded by industry. And they're like the experts in Canada on recycling. So we hired them to be the program operator. So ABP administers the finances, the APRG, we oversee the program. And then Clean Farms is really the organization that does the operations, day-to-day operations and collection of the two products.
Cool. So you mentioned collection. So
And I know I went and looked at your map, and you guys have got pickup sites all over the province.
Yeah.
So how did those pickup sites get started? How did the project grow?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like one of the big things that the ag members on the APRG wanted in a pilot was we really needed geographic representation. So that's something that we let Clean Farms know about, and they've been really good at trying to fill in all of the different spots in Alberta. And obviously, a municipality has to be willing and keen on participating in the pilot program. So they have to sign up with Clean Farms. We've done a pretty good job of covering most of the province. I think we have 34 collection partners that have signed agreements, and we have 90 collection sites throughout the province. No, so there, one municipality might be a collection partner, and they might have a whole bunch of different transfer stations or landfills that are collection points. That's why you have more collection points than you do collection partners. And some of those sites will only be for twine, and some will be only for grain bags, and then other ones you can do both. So with grain bags in particular, they're a little bit need a little bit like bigger space, and the logistics around which sites can take them as collection sites are a little bit more limited. But the entire province is covered. There's some holes, but we're still onboarding new sites as we speak. So we're hoping to address any of those holes. And if people get in touch with their, local municipality, if they're not involved already, just put a little pressure on your local Reeves or whatever county councilors, and they might be able to get on board too. So,
right on. So before we get too far into this, you mentioned you know a lot more about ag plastic recycling than you did before. Can you give me a quick overview of kind of how recycling works? Like, what's the life cycle of this twine or the grain bags once they get dropped off at a collection point?
Sure. I guess how you look at plastics and recycling is plastics are actually a commodity, just like, grain that we sell. And twine is a polyethylene, or a polypropylene is the makeup of twine. Polyethylene is what sheet plastic, like silage plastic and grain bags is made out of. So you really have to keep those all different plastic products separate. You have to think about it just like you do with any other commodity, right? You don't want to mix wheat in with barley or something and then just try to get rid of it. Because when you're recycling, the whole point of recycling is you take that product, you try to keep it clean and free from impurities, and then turn it back into plastic pellets that you can make new items out of. But it's the quality of the plastic is determined based on what the quality of the stuff you're recycling is. So that's why through the whole process, you have to make sure that you try to keep it as clean as possible. And really, it's a pretty easy thing. Like for twine, you collect the twine. If it's fairly clean, you put it in bags. Those bags, it's like loose twine. So then they have to bale it up, because the whole thing with the most expensive part of the recycling process is the transportation costs. And so in order to minimize transportation costs, we have to densify the material as much as possible. So usually that involves baling. So with twine, they bale up the loose twine into bales, and then they transport it to a recycler where, it's kind of washed or semi-clean. Then they shred it, then they melt it down, extrude it into like these small pellets that are polyethylene pellets, and then they get sold as a commodity back into a market. And especially now, there's more and more companies are looking for incorporating recycled, post-consumer recycled material back into their new products. And so there is a marketplace out there for the recycled plastic. And it, goes up and down based on, market factors, just like the virgin material would be. And the same goes with grain bags. You roll it up, try to get most of it clean, roll it up. It gets sent to a recycler. They wash it, shred it, and then pelletize it, and then they can sell it back into the commodity market. And the good news with grain bags, Alberta actually has 2 of the 3 grain bag recyclers in North America here, one in Assar and one just opened up in Bashaw, partially due to the Saskatchewan grain bag program. That's a permanent program now. And then also Alberta bringing in the pilot. They felt they had the certainty of supply to open up a new recycling plant. And so the one in Bashaw opened up just recently. And yeah, I think it's a really good news story for Alberta. And they're actually selling some of their grain bag pellets back to a grain bag manufacturer to incorporate into the grain bags. So the circular economy for plastics is what the end goal is, is where you can turn plastics back into the item that they were originally made for.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there's a concept I ran across kind of for the first time on your website when I was bopping around, and that's extended producer responsibility. So can you explain what that is and what the implications are?
Yeah. So this term it's a recycling industry term, and it's really confusing for agricultural producers because we're in the ag industry. We're used to hearing the term producer applied to us as producers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like commodity producers. In this sense, the producer is the producer or first seller of the actual plastic. And so this is kind of where recycling is moving all around the world. It takes the responsibility for managing end-of-life disposal or recycling of the product. And instead of putting that burden on municipalities or local governments the way it currently is, you take that and put it on the companies that are producing it and leave it up to them. Say, you guys are responsible for the recovery and recycling of your product. You guys can figure out how to do it. And the government just kind of does the enforcement mechanism. So the government stays out of it, and the industry has a lot of flexibility in terms of the way they want to go about doing it. They can sign partnerships with municipalities, or they can set up their own program. And usually the cost of the recycling program will become embedded in the price of the product at point of purchase. And you can either show it as a environmental handling fee, which, we have some idea of how that works with oil filters and oil. When we buy, it'll show up as like a EHC on your invoice. This is actually happening a lot of places already. In Alberta, they just passed EPR legislation last fall. And the first products they brought in were household packaging, paper, and hazardous waste. And we're asking, like, the APRG, we can get into this when we talk about what comes next, but we're hoping that eventually ag plastics can get onboarded into onto that legislation, into that regulation as well.
That makes sense. So you mentioned what comes next. The other really important question, of course, is the pilot has been running for a couple of years now. So what is the next step once the pilot is completed?
Yep. So the pilot started in 2019, and it was going to run for 3 years until 2021, but we actually just extended it till August of 2022. So we have another year to get better data and try to figure out what comes next. Because a pilot obviously is just being operated through a grant from the government, and it's not going to last forever. So part of the work that the APRG is doing is we're lobbying for a transition to a permanent program. And we've been talking to all of the different commodity groups, and we have letters of support from, I think, almost all of them. We have 10 or 11 letters of support saying that we support a transition to a permanent program. And we're recommending EPR as the model to do that. And there's a couple other things, like some of the recommendations we have are it has to be harmonized with the other Western provinces, because Manitoba and Saskatchewan both have regulated, legislated permanent programs in place. So it's kind of a lot of the retailers in particular would like to see harmonization for grain bags in particular right away, just because there's a bit of cross-border shopping and it complicates their lives. Also, any program needs to be geographically fair. So, it has to cover all of the province. So all producers have access to it. Yeah. And so it all depends on government, really. They're the ones that would have to agree to bring the different products like twine or grain bags into the regulation. It's probably a couple of years from now, but that's okay. We're part of the job that we see the APRG doing is really doing things like this, where we're trying to reach out to farmers and either get them involved in the pilot and increase awareness of like the issue. When Saskatchewan did this, Scott Moe, when he was environment minister at the time, he was the one that was trying to get grain bags brought into a EPR recycling regulation. And the first time they brought it in, there was some big pushback from producers, I think largely because there wasn't enough consultation and education done. And so they put it on pause for about a year and then had to reintroduce it. So that's what we're trying to avoid. Like we're trying to do a media blitz and talk to people and get them more aware and comfortable with the idea, because there is a cost behind it. I don't know if that's something you want to talk about. That's usually the farmer's number one question. What's it going to cost me?
Yeah, for sure. And that might be a good one to touch on. Just this cost is going to roll to the producers of the plastics first, but then it is going to roll down to ground level folks eventually.
Yeah. And that's like, even though the legislation says it's the extended producer responsibility is put on the people manufacturing, we all know how that goes. Like it always rolls downhill, and the farmer is going to be the one that ends up paying for it. And so there is a cost there. In Saskatchewan, they've been operating for a few years, and the cost to run the recycling program for grain bags is 5 to 7% of the cost of a grain bag. So that's like about $50 on a 10 by 300 foot grain bag. And they usually retail for like $1,000 to $1,500, I think. So it's $50. And the nice thing about it is when you buy it, you know that there's a responsible thing to do with it. Like, I think the way we have to look at it, or the way I talk to people when I'm trying to frame it, is everything has a cost. Right now, if you're taking it to your local landfill, they really don't like the plastics because it messes up with the circulation in their cells. It fills up, like it's a very bulky thing, so it fills up their landfills really quick. And municipal taxpayers are the ones paying for that. So there's a cost there. If you leave it lying on your farm, blowing around, like there's a cost to, especially with net wrap and twine and things, there's animals can eat it. It's just kind of an eyesore for when it gets stuck in fences and is blowing around. And there are still people burning it. About 25 to 30% of people still are burning their plastic. And sometimes that's the only option, but it is illegal for a reason. Like the toxins that come off low temperature combustion of plastics is terrible. And I think it doesn't look good on our sustainability claims and everything that we're saying we're stewards of the land. So I think it's something that we have to get away from and realize, yes, there is a cost to recycling. There's a cost to other things too. EPR is I believe it's probably the most market friendly, cheapest way of getting low cost recycling for products. So
yeah, that makes sense. So we talked about grain bags, plastic twine, and I remember I heard about this initiative at a rancher event in Olds like 5 or 6 years ago, right when it was just getting started. And they were talking about how grain bags and plastic twine were kind of the easiest two plastics to recycle, but there's a pilot running in Southern Alberta dealing with silage plastic now as well, right?
Yep, that's correct. It's so the twine and grain bag pilot is a provincial, like an Alberta government provincially run pilot program. The one in Lethbridge County that Clean Farms is running on silage bit plastic is through a federal grant that they got. And it's only in Lethbridge County. They partnered with the Alberta Cattle Feeders and Alberta Milk to trial on-farm, like a manual, low-cost, low-tech on-farm compactor to deal with the silage pit plastic, and then send it some of those bales that they're making to a recycler to see if they could do it. Because I think the idea, like as a beef farmer, silage pit plastic is probably my number one plastic that I have an issue dealing with. And when we started, that's what I personally wanted the Alberta pilot to work on. But at the time when we started, they didn't really think that there was an option for doing it. So I'm really excited about this. Like, it's pretty small scale, but the proof of concept, I think, is pretty positive. So they have a manual compactor that every time you cut your strip off of your silage bit, you just fold it up into, you cut a 4-foot strip off, and then you fold it up into a 4-foot by 4-foot square, and you put it in kind of the bottom of a crate almost, for lack of a better term. And you keep putting in those strips until it's about 4 feet high. And then you rotate another piece of crate kind of around over top of it. And then you just use a manual winch cable to winch it down and compact it. And then you lift it up and rotate it out of the way. And then you can keep putting more and more pieces of plastic in, and then until you can't compact it anymore, so it might take some people weeks, or a really big feedlot, it, wouldn't take as long. And then you tie it up with baler twine and you kick it out. And so you can, like that piece of plastic bale that you're kicking out of the compactor, I think is about 600 pounds. So like for me on my operation, I could probably put my whole winter's worth of silage plastic into one bale rather than into, 3 or 4 huge totes that you'd have to now to deal with it. So I think some of the big impediments to the idea of recycling silage plastic is that it was too dirty, but really maybe the edges and the ends of the pit and the sides of the pit could be dirty if you put dirt on them or whatever, or in certain seasons. But if you're cutting off that middle strip and then right away you're folding it up, which a lot of people do anyways, just to prevent the wind from blowing it around, and then all you have to do is put it in that little vertical compactor thing. I think it's a really easy solution for dealing with a bulky item that a lot of farmers were doing something with anyways. The big issue is you don't want to pull it off with your your loader in big ragged strips and then dump it in like the muddy thing and then drive over it for a week with your tractor and get it all muddy and then try to deal with it. So I think there's little things that it's just like a cultural shift. And same thing with recycling twine. I've been collecting twine for the last couple of years now for the recycling program, and I thought it would be more work than it is. Like what I say is don't try to be perfect, only collect what's easy. And so any twine that I pull off a bale, if it's clean, I put it in a recycling bag. If I struggle getting it off clean and it has some contamination in it, like some dirt or frozen lumps of straw or hay, I throw it in the tote bag that goes to the landfill. And it's zero extra work for me. And I'd say I probably capture 75% of the twine I use on my farm that's clean enough when I take it off. So it's just, I think if we just do what's easy, you'll be surprised with how much improvement it would be in your waste reduction.
For sure. And that twine, if you can't do anything with it, it's an easy way to wreck equipment. I remember it getting into like some bearings or something one time. It was not a fun time to get out of there.
Yeah, like plastic blowing around on the farm, it is an issue. And I know net wrap is another question you might have. Like some people say, well, why can't we recycle net wrap? And there's just no recycling option for it yet. You never know with technology and stuff, but the composition of it is a little bit unknown, I think, for the recyclers. And then also just the nature of the product makes it really prone to contamination. Like it's a really tricky one. So I think net wrap, we might be stuck with, putting it in tote bags and taking it to the landfill for the foreseeable future. But there are some alternatives on the horizon.
Yeah, I saw when I was looking around your website that you're keeping an eye on a biodegradable net wrap project. I know that's kind of a whole different podcast in and of itself, but do you have a quick overview of that?
Yep, it's I think it's pretty promising. Like COVID has definitely slowed down the development of it, and the basics of it is there was a farmer and his son were struggling with getting net wrap off frozen bales, in the springtime, that had gone through a freeze thaw cycle, and his son was pretty frustrated with how hard it was. And so they said, well, why don't we try to do something about it? And so they've been working with Alberta Innovates and some scientists at the University of Alberta that are specialists in biopolymers to try to come up with a biodegradable net wrap that, just imagine how awesome it would be for bale grazing. You don't have to try to collect all that stuff. Like you can just go out and cut it into 4 spots and then leave it there. And it's not just going to break down into small little pieces of plastic. It'll actually biodegrade in the soil. They've done a lot of testing on ones that would allow the bioplastic to be strong enough and stretchy enough to be manufactured into a net wrap. They're hoping this fall to have their first roll of biodegradable net wrap, just a one-off made to see how it performs going through a baler and stuff. I'd say, stay tuned about it. I think I'm really hopeful, but who knows? They're still in the trial phase, and I'd say, I can put you in touch with the people, and maybe a year from now you can do a podcast.
Sounds great.
Yeah, and while we're speaking about alternative products to plastics, I think it's an important aspect of extended producer responsibility style programs that it should drive innovation in alternative products being brought to market. Once you start to pay for the full cost of the disposal or recycling of a plastic product at point of purchase, it will make alternative products that don't need to be recycled more cost competitive and likely to be made. So whether that's a biodegradable net wrap or an edible sheet plastic or another product we haven't thought of yet, those products might actually be more user-friendly in a lot of situations for the farmer. And if they don't need to be recycled, I think that's a win-win. But we need the economic incentive for entrepreneurs and business to bring those products to market. And I think in the long run, recycling will be part of the solution, and alternative innovative products will be the other solution.
For sure. So if somebody does want more information on recycling sites, they want to find one near them, or they want to know how the APRG works, or they want to just learn more generally about plastic recycling and that sort of stuff, where should they go?
The best place to go is you can visit the Clean Farms website. That's just cleanfarms.ca. Or you can visit the Agricultural Plastics Recycling Group website, which is the APRG.com. I think that's .com. It might be .ca. Yeah, and all of the information on the different programs are there. A lot of the FAQs we've put up. So pretty much any question that farmers have about recycling and the cost and how to do it and what happens to it and everything, like I've asked those questions, and the other farmers on the APRG have asked those questions. And so we've tried to pretty much put them all together. So they're all in one spot. And and if your municipality, if you want them to get involved, there's a sign up form for municipalities. If they want to become a collection site on the Clean Farms website too.
Right on. I'll put the links to all those two websites and a couple of the extra pages down in the description of the podcast, so you can check them out.
Okay.
And anything else we've missed?
Up in your guys' area, like in the area that your Forage Association covers, I think right now there's only 3 collection sites. There's the Cleardale transfer site, North Peace Regional Landfill, and then Claremont Landfill. And so there are some holes up there. I'd say stay tuned. Like the Clean Farms is still onboarding some new sites that we're trying to address some of those holes. So hopefully there's some news coming out, in the next couple months about filling in some of those geographic holes.
Right on.
Yeah.
It is exciting that we do have some sites. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you have any other questions, like you can always feel free to get in touch with me. I'm more like on the beef side of things, the representative on the APRG from the grain sector is Dean Hubbard. He's farms down in southern Alberta, but we're happy to talk about recycling to farmers. If people have concerns or questions or whatever, you can put them in touch with us. Our contact information is on the APRG website.
Fantastic. Peace Country Beef and Forage Association is a research and extension group based out of Fairview, Alberta. Our mission is to help producers thrive in an agricultural system that is profitable, regenerative, and attractive to future generations. To learn more about what we do and see the results of our research trials or our archive of newsletters and fact sheets, check out our website at peacecountrybeef.ca. Want to get in touch? Have a burning question or a topic suggestion? Send us a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. Thanks for listening.